Hello dear 1000 PS friends, Philip here, and a warm grüß from the Slovakia Ring, where I've spent the last 2 days riding these 3 beautiful motorcycles to find out one thing. How much sport bike do you really need? Is an RS457 enough? Is the sweet spot perhaps the RS660 Factory? Or do you have to reach all the way to the top shelf and go for the RSV4 1100 Factory, the queen of Aprilia's lineup? Yes, dear people, thank you for still being here. For me personally, this is a video I was genuinely looking forward to. Why? Because I kept looking at the spec sheets again and again, and then I realized that Aprilia has spread out these models beautifully. With the RS457, we have an A2 rocket, an entry bike into Aprilia's sport bike world. With the RS660 Factory, we have a very potent, high-quality middleweight, and of course, with the RSV4 Factory, we have the absolute queen of the Aprilia lineup, a proper superbike, 220 horsepower, insanely expensive, but packed with everything you need. But now the question is, do you really need everything that is built into this superbike? Or can you, as a motorcyclist, also have a lot of fun with the smaller or the middle sister? And that is what I now want to go into in a bit more detail. The reason we were riding here at the Slovakia Ring is because using the sporting potential of these bikes on the road is almost impossible. But on a racetrack, you can do it. So we thought, let's grab the 3 bikes and take a very close look at what they can do under genuinely sporty conditions. And with that said, I'd say let's start straight away with the A2 rocket, the RS457 in detail. The RS457 is basically the A2 rocket in Aprilia's portfolio, and you could call it the entry-level bike. Yes, there is also an RS125, but we deliberately did not bring that one to the track days. So we are starting here with the A2 class. And what does A2 class mean in this case? Aprilia has made full use of it. 48 horsepower, 44 Newton meters of torque, and a price somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 euros. I have put the remaining details into the video description for you, and now I want to go a little deeper into what you get for that money and how much sport bike you can actually expect. And I have to say, in my opinion, this is a rock-solid start into the sport bike segment. Why? You can already see it. Visually, it makes a very strong impression. You really have to look twice, maybe 3 times to notice the difference compared with the bigger RS models. And in terms of equipment, Aprilia also offers quite a lot. For example, we have a TFT display, we have traction control, of course ABS, and we also have a reasonably solid menu system. But above all, and this is so important, we have a very good engine. The twin-cylinder engine in this bike is set up a little differently than you might expect. I would call it a mix of everyday usability and sportiness because it is not a high-revving engine. Instead, it has a strong, beefy mid-range. And with this motorcycle, you are sometimes even a bit quicker if you shift up 1 gear earlier, because if you ring it out completely, not that much happens right at the very top. That means this motorcycle teaches you something very nicely. Even if you are in the wrong gear, the bike can still save you, because for an A2 bike, it has comparatively good torque. And that is wonderful, because it does happen that you enter a corner 1 gear too low because you think you need more punch on the exit. No. With this motorcycle, you can also ride 1 gear higher. That is not the case with every bike in the A2 class. Another special thing about this motorcycle is the chassis as a whole, because quite often A2 bikes are softened up a bit when manufacturers want to appeal to a broad target group. Of course, out of these 3 sisters, this is the softest one, or let's say the most comfortable one. That also has something to do with the ergonomics, but I will come back to that in a moment. The suspension layout is also a little bit softer, but it is soft while still being understandable with good feedback. What do I mean by that? The fork could of course be set up firmer. You do get a bit of movement under braking or when you accelerate hard and move around a lot on the bike, but it never collapses completely. You always still have the feeling that something is working underneath you. It is the same at the rear. It does not simply start pumping under full load. Instead, it keeps working for quite a long time, quite consistently, and above all, predictably. Important for a sporty rider, I want to feel what the motorcycle beneath me is doing. I would even say that the overall handling, including the turn-in of the RS457, is really neutral. You start leaning in at just a few degrees, and all the way down to maximum lean angle, it drops into the radius in a totally predictable and understandable way. It is never twitchy, never stubborn, and even at higher speeds, it offers increasing stability. That is also not typical for this class. There is one small downside, however, in the overall chassis and suspension package. And for me, it is the biggest weakness of this motorcycle: the tire. Here at the Slovakia Ring, we naturally have a fast track, and with these 48 horsepower, you do tend to be a little underpowered. But you can partly compensate for that in the infield, because for this class, it handles so precisely. But after 2 or 3 laps in high temperatures, the tire is simply at its limit. Yesterday, we had 26 degrees air temperature and constant sunshine, so the asphalt was obviously even warmer. After 2 or 3 laps, the tire was, let's say, right on the edge and started to smear. It was so close to the limit that yesterday I almost had a proper crash on this motorcycle. Why? Coming out of a tight corner, I kept thinking in the wrong gear, 1 gear too low, that I had to fire it out on full throttle to use every bit of power. And if I had not had traction control, I would have gone down because the rear really slid away on me, and very abruptly. That means the transition at the rear tire from I still have grip to it is over was extremely narrow. There was no warning. I did not feel it building up. It just snapped, and thank God the traction control caught me. What I also want to mention on this motorcycle is the braking setup, which is also very important for sporty riders. We only have a single brake disc up front, and we have a bi-brake caliper. So a brake caliper from Biber, which is basically the more affordable brand from Brembo. We have an axial brake master cylinder, which does not exactly look like high tech, but actually gives pretty good feedback. Of course, it is not comparable with the precision at the brake lever of the 2 larger models. I will come back to that later. But the pure braking performance for this class, the feedback at the lever, and also the first initial bite are really solid and absolutely fine. Personally, I think sharper brake pads and better tires would do this motorcycle a lot of good. They would definitely lift it up another level. But overall, this is a package that, in terms of equipment, value for money, and especially ergonomics, everyday usability and accessibility, is very well rounded, especially for beginners, but also for 1 or 2 riders who already have more experience in the saddle. And on this RS4 57 model, we also have the optional Quickshifter with blipper function. That means clutchless shifting up and down. It costs around 200 euros extra, but it is worth every cent because it fits beautifully into the overall concept of the RS4 57. Very briefly, a few words about the ergonomics. Why do I keep mentioning this? In direct comparison, you notice that these bikes are not only positioned differently in terms of engine and equipment, but also in terms of ergonomics. The seat here is the lowest at 800 millimeters, the clip-ons are the highest, and they are also angled down the least, so they are the straightest of the 3. That means that of all these 3 sport bikes here, this one gives you the most comfortable riding position. That does have one disadvantage when you are riding really, really fast, or when you are genuinely searching for the limit on the racetrack. Then you miss a little bit of feedback simply because of the riding position. You would like to get a bit lower, especially at the clip-ons, or have the rear a little higher so that you sit a bit more aggressively over the bike. The foot pegs are also the furthest forward here, and they feel like the lowest as well. So the rider triangle is the most relaxed on this bike. That is wonderful for everyday riding and for country roads. At the absolute limit on the racetrack, it could be a little sharper, a little more focused, but that is exactly why this is the entry-level machine. And now we move on to the RS660, because that is already one step up. For many riders, the RS660 in this factory version will probably be the golden middle ground. And I have to admit, while preparing this video, I already had this gut feeling. I think this might be my favorite. Why? Well, I read through the technical data, I looked at the pricing, and it was pretty clear that this could be exactly the bike that matches my level. Why? Why? Well, in the factory version, we have a complete Ohlins suspension package. We have 105 horsepower, 70 Newton meters of torque, and again, the well-known twin-cylinder engine, which we also know from the Tuono 660. So it is an engine that does have some vibrations, but it pulls really nicely through the rev range, responds well to the throttle, and here it represents a major step forward compared with the smaller sister. Overall, for me, the RS660 is genuinely one of the best all-round sport bikes currently on the market. Because besides this often mentioned accessibility, you can really feel the racing genes inside it, the chassis, the suspension setup, the ergonomics, basically the complete packaging of the whole chassis and structure already move in a very sporty direction. I do not really want to call it a full super sport bike, but it gets very close. It definitely moves toward a highly precise chassis. But it has to be said that the fully adjustable Ohlins suspension fitted here is significantly firmer compared with the smaller sister. You feel that very quickly on the racetrack, for example, where you ride over a section on the smaller bike and barely feel any bumps, or only very slightly on this bike you feel every single wave in the surface. That also has something to do with the tire. Here we have a Pirelli fitted, the Diablo Rosso 4, which is, in quotation marks, a very good road tire, but it still keeps up surprisingly well at racetrack pace, and it lasts longer than I expected. I will come back to that a little later because I want to put that into better context. What I also really like about the RS660 is the ergonomics. This motorcycle has a higher seat height and slightly lower clip-ons than the smaller sister, but it is not radical. An 820mm seat height is absolutely fine for a sport bike. The clip-ons are not mounted below the upper triple clamp, but slightly above it, although not in a sport touring kind of way. The handlebar has a wonderful width, a good angle, and a nice downward drop. That means you can position yourself very sportily on this motorcycle without ever feeling like something is pinching too tight or blocking you. I find the ergonomics very good, even with my height of 1.85 meters. A few people said it could be a tiny bit roomier. I get along with it well, but of course you have to decide that for yourself. You simply need to try it on a test ride. Another special thing about this motorcycle is the overall equipment. Up front, we already have twin brake discs with Brembo calipers. We have a radial brake master cylinder. We have a full electronics package, so nothing is missing. We have a 6-axis IMU, which means everything is lean angle sensitive, both the ABS and the traction control. It regulates finely, and I can easily increase the traction control while riding. We have anti-wheelie control, so really everything is there that you need when you start riding a motorcycle more seriously and more sportily. Now I want to go into a little more detail about the suspension. How does it feel when I ride this motorcycle in a sporty way? The big difference is that because the entire suspension is already a bit firmer and offers more feedback, you ride into the corner and you immediately notice something. Where the smaller sister felt like it had a slight filter over everything, where it felt a little soft and vague, partly because of the tire, and where it was not always perfectly clear what would happen next, here you get a very different feeling. This motorcycle communicates much more clearly with you. You can almost feel it when you turn into the corner. Okay, now the front tire is starting to work, or when you get on the throttle on the way out of the corner, okay, now the rear wants to work, now the 105 horsepower is coming in, but the tire can still handle it. So there is a lot of feedback here. And most importantly, it is communicated very clearly, also beautifully through the seat. It is not too soft and not too hard, so you really do get information communicated straight through the seat about what is going to happen next. And that is something you need when you want to ride faster or when you want to become faster. Because you simply need this communication, this connection between tire, backside and track. And in my opinion, that works extremely well here because it is also comparatively easy on your energy. The motorcycle does not tear your arms off like a 1000 cubic centimeter bike would. Instead, with these 105 horsepower, it has what is for me a very good power class. You can fully use it both on the road and on the racetrack. You do not have the feeling that the motorcycle is riding you. You are the master of this bike's power. At the same time, this motorcycle still teaches you to ride a good line because you have more power than with the smaller sister, but still not so much power that you can completely compensate for bad lines. I also want to talk about the brakes in a little more detail. Here we have dual 320mm discs with Brembo radial calipers and most importantly a radial brake master cylinder. And that gives you a very crisp, very sporty braking feel, almost on super sport level. Short-lived travel, nice initial bite. In my opinion, the brake pads are also exactly the right mix of bite without being extremely overwhelming. They also come up to temperature quickly. The deceleration is very linear, so when you pull the lever, you know exactly how the bike will respond to that lever pressure. The ABS also works very sensitively here, especially compared with the smaller sister. You do notice a slight pulsing at the lever, but the control intervals are pleasantly short. There are no surprises. In terms of braking, I really have to say, absolutely top-notch. I do not miss anything here. Maybe it is even the best in the class. As for the rest of the electronics, as we said, we have anti-wheelie control, we have traction control, and of course we also have a Quickshifter and blipper. All of that is already on a very high level. You get a lot of equipment for the money and above all modern, well-developed electronics. That means short control intervals and predictable interventions. Or I would even say understandable interventions. It does not simply cut the power brutally. Instead, you notice, okay, now the traction control is coming in. Now what I do at the throttle grip is no longer being translated one-to-one. But that is fine. It does not hold you back. I actually think I was riding on level 1, so as little intervention as possible, and it probably made me faster rather than slowing me down. I did find 2 small points of criticism on this motorcycle though, and now maybe a few Aprilia fans will give me a hard time. I still think, yes, you now have a new large TFT display. It is wonderful, easy to read, and clearly better than on the previous model. But I still do not find the menu navigation entirely intuitive. Maybe that could still be improved a little. The next criticism concerns something that might get the comments fired up a bit. It is the tires. I thought about this for a long time. Should I mention it? Should I not mention it? Fundamentally, this is not a bad tire. But yesterday I also spoke with Martin Bauer, and it took both of us quite a long time to develop a feeling for this tire. And there are definitely tires that give you more feedback than the Pirelli fitted here as standard, especially on the racetrack. The tire takes quite a long time before it really starts working. You can see that too. When you look at it closely, until you get those classic racetrack marks on the tire, you really have to push quite hard. And until that moment, you have to ride a bit into the unknown, at least in terms of confidence. You do not go out with this tire and immediately have a feel for the front. It takes a while until the tire properly gets into its working window. And for 1 or 2 riders, especially at the beginning, if you sit on the bike, highly motivated, go straight out, fire away immediately and think, right, now I am going to tear the world apart, that could go wrong. You might suddenly stop feeling something and already be riding in a zone that is close to the limit. So my recommendation here as well is that you could probably give this motorcycle a few extra % of performance with very little effort. Maybe fit a Pirelli Supercorsa SP when you go to the racetrack, because that tire also needs temperature, but then you have the right tire on it. And then I think this is the motorcycle where many riders out there may actually find that golden middle ground. Not too much, not too little. And the whole thing still comes at a somewhat reasonable price. Although, careful, I do have to say this now, the price in Austria is still 16,000 euros. I've written down the prices for Germany and Switzerland for you as well. That is still a serious amount of money. After all, it is still only 105 horsepower. And for the same money, you can also get a Yamaha R9, where you have a 900 cubic centimeters 3-cylinder engine with around 15 horsepower more. So in terms of pricing, I have to say it is positioned rather on the high side, but in return you get Ohlins, Brembo and full electronics. You have to decide for yourselves whether that is worth it to you or not. And now let's take a look at the big sister. The Superbike RSV4 Factory is the best thing you can buy from Aprilia for money. It is the icon. Many of you know the infernal sound of this motorcycle. Last year we did a very comprehensive test with its competitors, also here at the Slovakia Ring, so I do not want to bore you now with technical details. You can find all of that in the other videos and in last year's test reports. Here it is all about placing it in context compared with the smaller sisters. And my basic theory was, yes, you can always buy this bike. Of course, it is also a prestige object, but actually an RS 660 Factory is perfectly enough to have fun. I have to honestly admit, as a sporty rider, that theory is quite easy to disprove. Because when you spend 2 days here at the Slovakia Ring like I did, and you first ride the small bike, then the middle one, and you get a feeling for both, you already think with the RS 660, that is a serious amount of sport bike. That is a really good sport bike. And then you sit on the RSV4, and suddenly it is a completely different world. The power is brutally higher. It is simply more than twice the power, 220 horsepower. There is real fire in it, and at the beginning you really have to overcome yourself to properly open the throttle, because even at 3/4 throttle you think, that must be it. No, you can still go all the way to the stop, and then it catapults you forward. It is pure madness. But the riding position is also significantly more demanding. The seat is another 2 centimeters higher, and the clip-ons are even lower again. Here they are clamped below the upper triple clamp. That means you are very front wheel oriented on this bike. And if you are not carrying a certain basic speed, it becomes really exhausting. On the road, you basically need at least motorway speeds so that you have an air cushion to rest on a little, because otherwise, sooner or later, your forearms and shoulders will run out of strength. It is also the bike where, at the beginning, I sat on it with a fair amount of respect. I say that openly, and I thought to myself, I will just ride it for now. I will just roll around a bit and see what happens, and that does not work on this motorcycle at all. If you sit on this motorcycle and think, well, I will just let the bike do the work for me, then it becomes really exhausting, because then you are too late with everything. We have a brutal brake here. The high-power brake calipers from Brembo are currently absolute top-end equipment. And you feel that. The initial bite is brutal, the deceleration is brutal, and you need that because when you really let this thing run, you arrive at the corners so much faster than on the smaller sisters. You simply have to slow down from those high speeds. Combined with this very compact, very sporty riding position, you then have a lot of pressure on your wrists. And if you do not have full body tension, it just destroys you. You ride 2 or 3 laps and you are completely finished. But if you say, no, I am going to sit on this thing now and actively ride it, I'm going to ride with body movement, with body tension, I'm going to try to tame this beast underneath me, then suddenly it becomes more harmonious, then it works, then you start saying, hey, this is actually not that exhausting. You do have to move your body, but because you are moving, you no longer feel so overwhelmed. Instead, it suddenly even starts to feel quite playful. I really noticed that. Lap by lap, I got along better with the motorcycle and I felt faster and safer, simply because I moved more. Just sitting on it and riding, please do not do that. That is no fun either. Sitting on it and saying, I'm going on the attack now, that is what it is made for. And then the rider is rewarded with something that, quite frankly, the other 2 bikes simply cannot offer in the same way, because the feedback from this motorcycle is even more crystal clear. The whole bike sits even more stable through the corner. The suspension, electronic Ohlins suspension, where I felt the bump with the RS660. I feel the bump here as well, but not in an annoying way. It does not unsettle the chassis. Instead, the motorcycle tells me, here, there is a bump, but I am just riding over it. It does not ruin my line. It does not send any unpleasant information into the handlebar. I simply drive over it and know, okay, there is a bump there. And maybe, if I were riding even faster, I would have to be careful. But I am not at the limit yet. The very sporty tire helps here as well. As standard, we have a Pirelli Supercorsa SP fitted. In practice, you could almost call it a semi-slick. It also needs a bit of temperature before it works properly. But once it is up to temperature, in combination with this motorcycle, it becomes a precision weapon. Incredible. That is when it becomes really fun. Of course, it is demanding because the power and the braking performance are a huge difference. What I personally do not find quite so great is the exhaust here, or rather this cover, this heat shield. It gets in the way a little when you are sitting on the bike and trying to find a good position with your foot. You can see it, you quite easily touch it with your boot. That is the only thing in terms of ergonomics on this motorcycle that I really find a bit off, a shame. Maybe it could be solved better with an accessory exhaust or something like that. For everyday use, I also have to say that the riding position would basically be too demanding for me. But if I say I want a motorcycle with which I can ride track days very seriously, and above all, I do not have to change anything from stock, then this is it. Because the packaging here is really something where you notice you are in the top class. It just fits. So I believe 99% of us could ride our best lap times on this motorcycle straight out of the box, every time. I had no fading. I only had, here and there, at the end of the start-finish straight, a slight vibration in the front brake. Where that comes from, I do not know. But it was not bad. It was not dangerous. I just felt something there. It may also be that the brakes are not 100% bedded in yet. But I do not want to talk too much about that now. I just wanted to mention it. I felt a little vibration, but only in that one corner. Otherwise, the brake is truly a dream in terms of modulation, feedback, and deceleration. Good initial bite, which is important because as soon as you grab the lever, you want to feel that the bike immediately wants to slow down. And then, even though it bites so strongly, you can still dose the lever with a lot of feeling and brake nicely into the corner without having the feeling that the front wheel wants to disappear or that the ABS suddenly comes in or anything like that. So it is really, really well solved. But here as well, I can only emphasize it once more. Please ride with body movement, because otherwise it does not work. I do not think we need to say much about the electronics. It has the full package, everything that is possible, slide control. And that was very funny in the onboard footage. Maybe you can see it there. That shows how good this electronics package is, because I was riding my faster laps and thought, now it is starting, now it is really working, now I feel good in the saddle. And then at some point I looked at the display and saw that the slide control was constantly intervening. And what I want to say with that is the feeling the slide control gives you is that you are completely in control. Without electronics, I have to be completely honest, I do not think I would have finished all of my sessions. I think sooner or later it would have thrown me off, because with this motorcycle, even after the corner exit, even with average talent like mine, you can really go full throttle, and the motorcycle, especially the electronics, keep you in check and bring you safely out of the corner. In one session, a colleague of mine, Ohlins, a riding technique coach and instructor, even pulled a beautiful 10-meter black slide out of one corner fully on the electronics. So you can ride really, really fast here and above all, safely. You have a safety net built in, which is especially good for us hobby riders. Because in combination with all the feedback you get, together with this brutal power, the good brake, and the safety net of the electronics, you can actually approach the limit areas very safely, as long as you switch on your brain and simply understand that you arrive at every corner 20, 30, maybe 40 kilometers per hour faster than on the smaller sisters. If you program that into your head or take it into account with your braking points, almost nothing can happen to you, as long as you ride with your brain switched on. And that brings me a little bit to my conclusion. I have to honestly say, I thought the RS660 was the golden middle ground. But I also have to honestly admit that the RSV4 is not the biggest of the three sisters without reason. It is the model with the greatest sporting potential. Not because it is the most powerful, not because it is the most expensive, not because it has the best components, but because the overall package made from all these components is so well rounded that normal riders like us can simply get on it and afterwards basically send a thank you letter to Noli and thank the Aprilia engineers, because this is a really good sport bike. One that I honestly would not buy for the road. I have to be honest about that too. It would be too exhausting for me. For that, I would take the RS660. And if I were a beginner riding on a kart track, then I would be perfectly happy with the RS457. But if I want the best of the best and I can afford it, then this is the choice. Then you simply have the best thing you can buy from Aprilia. And afterwards, you do not need to worry anymore, because this motorcycle is more than enough for all of us. In my opinion, nobody needs more than this. Now, of course, I would also like to know at the end, what would be your choice? What would you buy? Which of these three models do you maybe already own? Have you perhaps even had the luxury of going through this whole progression? Did you start with the small one? Did you spend time with the middle one? Are you dreaming of the big one, or do you already own the big one? Write it in the comments. I am looking forward to your feedback. Many thanks from the Slovakia Ring. Thanks also to my crew, who as always helped me out perfectly. With that said, thank you and goodbye.